Imagine standing in the middle of a familiar crowded city.
Yeah, a place you know really well.
Right. Maybe it's the city you live in right now, the one
Yeah.
you're listening from.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just the place you commute to every day.
The backdrop of your whole routine.
Exactly, the backdrop. And it probably feels completely ordinary to you by now. I mean, the streets are packed with traffic. The buildings are just these, massive stacks of concrete and glass.
The sidewalks are covered in yesterday's rain.
Yeah. And the daily grind just seems entirely predictable. But what if you stopped, took a breath, and just looked closer?
Really paid attention.
Right. What if you suddenly realized that this place isn't just some empty container for human activity? What if it is actively shaping that activity?
Oh, that's a huge question.
It is. What if the actual dirt, the pavement, the layout of the streets, and the borders of the neighborhoods are profoundly moral spaces? I mean, what if geography is never just geography?
It's a profound shift in perspective, and frankly, it's a really disruptive one for the modern mind.
No, totally.
Because we are so accustomed to treating places as a mere backgrounds to our lives, we treat them as a stage.
Like a dead neutral stage.
Exactly. A neutral stage where the real action, the human drama happens. But the reality is that places are not neutral at all. They carry memory.
Right.
They carry historical conflict, generational longing, cultural identity, and, profound hope. When you stand on a street corner, you are standing on a layered history of decisions, injustices, and redemptions.
Which is exactly what we're exploring today. We have an incredibly fascinating mission for this deep dive.
I'm really excited about this one.
Me too. We are taking a journey through a comprehensive theological text dedicated to the biblical theology of place. And our goal here is to fundamentally change how you, the person listening to this right now, view the ground beneath your feet.
It's going to flip everything upside down.
It really is. We are going to explore how, in the biblical imagination, God doesn't save people in some floating, abstract spiritual vacuum. He saves them somewhere.
And to really grasp the weight of that, we have to first recognize and honestly dismantle a very specific, very ingrained modern habit of thought.
You're talking about the portable software update idea.
Yes.
Which I absolutely love as a framework for what we get wrong today. Modern people, and I definitely include myself in this allegation, we tend to view faith or deeply held belief systems like an app you download to your smartphone.
Yeah, well, it's just data.
Yeah, it's this portable software update that exists completely in the cloud. It's entirely detached from the soil, from your local culture, from the specific neighborhood where you sleep and work.
Because the assumption is that you just download the belief system into your brain, right?
Exactly. And then it operates exactly the same whether you are sitting in a high-rise apartment in Tokyo or a rural farmhouse in Iowa or, I don't know, a coffee shop in London.
It is an incredibly common way of thinking, and it's largely driven by the Enlightenment separation of mind and body.
Oh, sure.
And it's vastly accelerated by our modern era of, digital reach and constant physical mobility.
Right. Like, if I can work from anywhere, I assume my spirituality can exist anywhere in the exact same way.
Exactly. But the source material we are examining today argues that Scripture aggressively, almost violently resists this reduction.
It pushes back hard.
It really does. From the very first pages of Genesis to the closing visions of Revelation, place is consistently presented as a moral arena. It is the physical laboratory where a covenant with God is tested.
Wow.
It's where communal worship is ordered and where human identity is actually forged. The biblical text reveals a God who doesn't just broadcast general truths into the ether.
Right. He doesn't just tweet from heaven.
Exactly. He speaks in specific places. He calls people into specific places. He judges places, and he redeems places.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Sure.
Because to really get our heads around this, to stop thinking like digital nomads and start thinking biblically about the dirt, we have to start at the absolute beginning.
The very beginning.
Yeah, we need to look at the creation of place itself. Before anything is wounded or broken, what was the original intention?
Right. And what's fascinating here is that the biblical narrative doesn't begin with a cloud of pure theology.
No floating spirits and a timeless void discussing philosophy.
Exactly. It begins with a garden.
Genesis, the very first pages of the text.
Genesis opens in a richly located, intensely physical world. You have this separation of light and dark, sky and sea, dry land and rivers. God is acting as the ultimate architect.
Building the house.
Right, creating boundaries and carefully preparing habitats. And then comes Eden. The text points out a nuance that is so easily missed. Adam and Eve aren't just created in a white room and left to wander.
Right, they aren't just spawned in.
No, they are placed. The Hebrew narrative makes it clear that humanity is commissioned within a very specific geographic location, a garden.
A physical space.
Yes. The mandates they are given work, worship, stewardship, relationship, all of these are given in a specific physical location.
Which proves right out of the gate that we are intrinsically bodily creatures. We are made for soil, for cultivation, for physical belonging. We aren't disembodied souls who are just tragically trapped in meat suits.
Right, waiting to escape the physical world so we can go play harps on a cloud.
Exactly. The physical world is the point.
That is a crucial theological pillar. In the ancient Near East, many surrounding cultures viewed the physical world as an afterthought.
Or like an accident.
Yeah, or perhaps the result of a war among the gods, something inherently chaotic or low tier. But Genesis presents Eden as the first sanctuary. It is an agricultural space, absolutely, but it is also a sacred space.
Because God is there.
Precisely. Because God walks there in the cool of the day. His presence is what gives the geography its ultimate meaning.
That's beautiful.
It reveals a foundational biblical truth about space. A place becomes holy not because dirt has some intrinsic, mystical, magical energy radiating from it.
Right, the dirt isn't glowing.
Exactly. It's holy because the creator of the dirt has chosen to manifest his presence there. And because humanity was created for this placed goodness, as the text calls it, what happens next in the story is all the more tragic.
Right, because we don't stay in the garden, we have the fall. And when things go wrong in Genesis 3, it's not just a spiritual breaking of a rule. The consequence is deeply, undeniably geographical.
It is what the author terms the wound of place.
The wound of place.
Yes. After the rebellion, Adam and Eve aren't just given a stern talking to. They are physically driven out. They are sent east of Eden.
Eastward.
That specific directional movement eastward becomes a haunting motif throughout the rest of Genesis. It becomes the definitive shorthand for exile and estrangement from the presence of God.
Wow.
Think about their son, Cain. When he commits the first murder, what is his punishment? He is sent away to become a restless wanderer on the earth.
A vagabond.
Right. He cries out that his punishment is greater than he can bear, precisely because he is being driven from the ground and from God's face.
So place itself is no longer innocent. It fractures right along with the human heart.
Precisely. The text notes that human sin immediately distorts our experience of place in several distinct ways.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, it produces profound alienation, where people feel disconnected from their environment, strangers in their own hometowns.
Yeah, we definitely feel that today.
Second, it produces domination. Instead of the garden stewardship where land is a gift to be cultivated and coaxed into flourishing, land becomes an object to conquer.
To exploit.
Right, to extract value from until it's dead. Third, it produces exile, which turns location into a constant aching wound of not being home.
That feeling of homesickness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And finally, it produces spatial idolatry.
Spatial idolatry. Okay, that brings us perfectly to the Tower of Babel, which, when you think about it, is the ultimate real estate project of the ancient world.
It is the archetype of human geography corrupted by pride. In Genesis 11, humanity gathers on a plain in Shinar and says, "Let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves."
But what is the actual psychology behind that? I mean, why build a giant tower? Were they literally trying to climb into the clouds to physically touch God?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of ancient Near Eastern architecture, the Tower of Babel is essentially a ziggurat.
A ziggurat.
Yes, a massive tiered structure functioning as an artificial mountain. The psychology wasn't necessarily to climb up and invade heaven like a military operation.
Okay, so not a ladder to sneak in.
No, it was to build a structure so imposing, a religious monument so monumental, that the gods would be forced to come down and bless their empire.
Oh, wow. That's a manipulation tactic.
Exactly. It is a monument to unified human self-exaltation. It's an attempt to secure human identity and safety through engineering and urbanization completely apart from God's provision.
Sort of basically saying, we don't need you, God. We built our own safety.
Right. It shows how human sin turns geography into a theater of rebellion. They wanted to centralize power to avoid being scattered, which was a direct violation of God's command to fill the earth.
Now, here is something I struggled with while reading through this section of the sources. I felt myself pushing back on the narrative a little bit.
Oh, so?
Well, if place is so wounded, if human beings just keep ruining the cities with pride and ruining the land with violence and extraction and creating this constant state of exile,
Yeah.
Why doesn't God just look at the physical map and say, you know what? The Earth is a total loss.
Just scrap the whole project.
Yeah. Why doesn't he pivot to a purely spiritual strategy?
Yeah.
He could just tell the next guy in the story, Abraham, look, the physical realm is a mess. Don't worry about cities or dirt anymore. Just focus purely on your internal mindfulness.
Right. Focus on the afterlife.
Exactly. Focus on this floating spiritual concept.
Mhm.
But he doesn't do that at all.
He does the exact opposite, doesn't he?
He really does. He calls Abraham to a very specific physical piece of land. It's almost like God absolutely refuses to abandon the physical real estate market.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like the whole world is a dilapidated, condemned property. And instead of walking away, God buys a single plot of land in the Middle East to start a total renovation.
I think buying a plot to start the renovation captures the theological mechanism perfectly. And this brings us to the pivotal moment in Genesis 12, the call of Abram.
Right.
God calls him away from his security. He says, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house. Now, in the ancient world, your land, your extended family, and your father's household were your entire identity.
Your safety net.
Your safety net, your retirement plan, and your religious context.
So God is completely severing him from his worldly, spatial identity.
Yes. But he doesn't call him into a vague, mystical wandering. He calls him toward a new, specific geography. To the land that I will show you.
But this is where the story plays a massive trick on Abraham. I mean, it's a complete tease.
How do you mean?
Because Abraham packs up everything, travels hundreds of miles, finally gets to the land of Canaan, and he doesn't get to build a fortress.
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't get to build a kingdom or a city or even a permanent house. He has to live his entire life in a tent.
This is what the source text calls the theology of delay.
The theology of delay.
Yes, and it is absolutely crucial for understanding biblical faith. Abraham is promised the land. God literally walks him through it and says to your offspring, I will give this land. But Abraham himself lives in it as a sojourner, an immigrant.
Wow.
He wanders, he pitches tents, he moves when the famine hits. He has to buy a burial plot from the Hittites just so he has a place to bury his wife, Sarah.
Right.
He never experiences the land as a simple, settled, secure inheritance in his own lifetime.
So he's a pilgrim.
He is, and we have to ask why. That tension, possessing the promise but not the property, is not an accidental delay. It is profoundly formative.
Formative how?
God is teaching Abraham, and by extension the reader, that a divine promise can be entirely real and trustworthy long before it is fully visible.
Oh, this is good.
Abraham has to learn to live in the agonizing, beautiful space between the words spoken by God and the fulfillment realized in history. The text beautifully pairs two defining objects of Abraham's life in the land, the tent and the altar.
Yes, the altars. I noticed that. He builds altars everywhere he stops, long before he builds anything else.
The tent and the altar represent two sides of his geographical reality. The tent speaks to transience. It says, I am here, my feet are on the ground, but I am not yet completely home. I hold this place loosely.
Because he could pack it up tomorrow.
Exactly. But the altar speaks to deep-rooted worship. It declares that this very ordinary patch of dirt, this dusty hill under an oak tree, has been consecrated by a divine encounter.
Wow.
Abraham doesn't treat the land as a commodity to exploit or a territory to aggressively conquer. He treats it as a space for communion with God.
It makes me think of his grandson, Jacob, years later at a place called Bethel. That story has always resonated so deeply with me.
It's a powerful scene.
It really is. Jacob is on the run from his brother, whom he just cheated. He's out in the wilderness, terrified, totally isolated. He uses a literal rock for a pillow.
A physical rock.
Yeah, and he falls asleep and has this incredible wild dream of a ladder or a staircase reaching up to heaven with angels going up and down and God standing at the top reaffirming the promise of the land.
Right.
Then Jacob wakes up, and his reaction is so telling. He doesn't say, wow, what a crazy dream. He says, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it.
It is arguably one of the greatest spiritual awakenings recorded in Scripture.
And what makes it so profound is that it implies that divine presence is often so much nearer than our human perception allows us to see.
Absolutely.
We constantly misread our own locations. We think we're just sleeping on a hard rock in the middle of a barren nowhere, completely abandoned. We look around our boring office cubicle or our messy kitchen or our frustrating commute, and we think, God is nowhere near this.
But Jacob realizes he was actually sleeping on holy ground.
Yes. God meets us in the ordinary, overlooked, fiercely uncomfortable in-between places.
And Jacob renaming that place Bethel, which means house of God, permanently marks that geography with his realization. Now, as the narrative progresses, that transition from the individual patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, Jacob to a massive, sprawling nation brings us to the next profound shift in this deep dive.
Right, because they end up in Egypt.
Exactly. The descendants multiply, they migrate to Egypt to survive a famine, and over centuries they are enslaved. That sets the stage for the Exodus.
So we're moving from the promise of a place, which was Abraham's experience, to the rules of a place.
Exactly. We enter the era of covenant geography. But the source material addresses a massive misconception right at the outset of this era, one that many modern readers fall into.
You mean the idea that the story basically ends when they escape Egypt?
Yes.
Because that's how all the movies portray it, right? The plagues happen, the Red Sea parts, Pharaoh's army is washed away in this dramatic climax, the Israelites sing a song on the other shore,
Yeah.
cue the swelling orchestral music, roll credits.
The happy ending.
Yeah, they are saved.
But that is exactly the misconception. Because of our modern individualized view of salvation, we tend to view salvation merely as a rescue operation.
Just getting out of danger.
A removal from danger, exactly. But in the biblical theology of place, liberation is not the terminus of the story. Escaping the bad place isn't the goal. Dwelling in the good place is.
Wow, that's a huge distinction.
God doesn't bring the nation of Israel out of Egypt just to leave them in a state of suspended animation, wandering around as free but aimless individuals. The biblical refrain is that he brings them out in order to bring them in.
Out to bring them in.
Yes. The journey from the slavery of Egypt to the settlement of Canaan is about the complete transformation of their communal identity. They have to learn from scratch what it means to live as the Lord's people in the Lord's space.
Which means they can't just teleport to the promised land.
Right.
They have to go through the wilderness. And the wilderness is, well, you could call it a classroom, but it is a brutal, unforgiving one.
It is entirely barren, completely exposed, and deeply disorienting. Think about what they left behind in Egypt.
A lot of structure.
Yes, it was cruel, back-breaking slavery, definitely. But Egypt also had massive granaries. It had the Nile River providing predictable irrigation. It had fortified cities and powerful armies. Egypt offered a very specific kind of highly structured imperial security.
Right.
In the wilderness, all the visible signs of human security are violently stripped away.
I was really chewing on this concept, and it strikes me that the wilderness is basically a mandatory spiritual detox center.
A spiritual detox center. Let's explore that.
Think about it. You've got this massive group of people who have lived their entire lives for generations under the oppressive, hyper-productive, extraction-based system of Egypt.
The empire.
Right. They have a slaves mentality. They view authority as abusive. They view food as something you break your back to earn for a master. If God simply dropped them straight into a land flowing with milk and honey, they would just recreate Egypt.
They'd build the same systems.
Exactly. They would immediately start hoarding the milk, monetizing the honey, and enslaving each other to build their own pyramids. They cannot be trusted with the abundance of the Promised Land until the toxic self-sufficiency and the trauma of Egypt are completely flushed out of their societal system.
That is a remarkably accurate way to describe the sociological and theological function of the wilderness.
Right.
God uses the geography of the desert to unmake their Egyptian identity.
How does he actually do it, practically?
First, they learn daily trust through the economy of the manna. God provides bread from heaven, but with strict rules. They can only gather enough for one day.
Oh, man.
If they try to stockpile it out of fear, which is what a slave from Egypt would naturally do to secure their future, it rots and breeds worms.
That is such a visceral lesson.
They can't manipulate it. They can't commodify it. It arrives purely as a gift, sufficient only for that 24-hour period. God is retraining their relationship with provision.
And he's also retraining their relationship with time and work, right through the Sabbath.
Exactly. In Egypt, you work 7 days a week until you drop dead. In the wilderness, where they have no land to cultivate anyway, God commands them to stop on the seventh day.
Forced rest.
There will be no manna on the Sabbath, but he provides a double portion on the sixth day that miraculously won't rot. He teaches them to live by divine rhythm rather than human panic.
Which is such a hard lesson for us today, too. We think if we aren't producing, we have no value.
Constantly on the grind.
Yeah. But God is saying rest isn't laziness, it's an act of worship. It's a declaration that I run the universe, not you.
Furthermore, in the wilderness, they learn the reality of divine presence. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night show them a profound truth.
Which is?
A barren desert where God is present is holy ground, while a wealthy palace where God is absent is a tomb. The wilderness, with its lack of distractions, forces them to confront what is really in their hearts.
So after 40 years, that generation passes. The new generation graduates from the wilderness detox, and they finally cross the Jordan River and enter the Promised Land. But it's not a free-for-all. It comes with a massive, incredibly detailed terms of service agreement.
The rules of the land. The Torah lays out a societal blueprint that is utterly unique in the ancient world. And it all rests on one fundamental principle of covenant geography, stated in Leviticus. The land is mine, for you are strangers and sojourners with me.
The land is mine. God says he owns it.
Yes.
That is such a radical paradigm shift. Even today, maybe especially today, we're completely obsessed with absolute ownership.
Yeah.
You know, this is my property, my yard, my house. I hold the deed. I can do whatever I want with it.
We treat it as absolute.
But God is saying, no, it's my property. It's a gift to you, and you are just the tenant. You are the steward.
And because it is a stewardship under a holy God, the geography itself must reflect God's justice and God's mercy.
Okay.
The land has ethics. It is not just an economic asset. If you are a tenant on God's land, you have to manage it according to the landlord's character.
That makes perfect sense.
The source text highlights several stunning examples of this, most notably the Year of Jubilee.
The ultimate economic reset button.
Exactly.
If you're listening to this and you've ever felt trapped by a 30-year mortgage or drowning in student loans or watched giant corporations buy up all the starter homes in your neighborhood, imagine an economic system explicitly designed to stop that from happening.
The Jubilee was revolutionary. The law stated that every 50th year, a massive reset occurred.
What happened?
All debts were canceled, Hebrew slaves were freed, and most importantly regarding place, any ancestral land that had been sold, usually because a family fell into poverty and had to liquidate their farm to survive, was automatically returned to its original family line.
Wait. Without compensation to the current owner?
Without compensation, because the purchaser only really bought a 50-year lease on the harvests, not the absolute rights to the dirt.
Wow.
The Jubilee prevents permanent generational poverty. It ensures that land cannot become a tool of absolute crushing power for a wealthy few, leaving the poor permanently locked in a state of landless despair.
That is incredible.
It structuralizes the truth that the community's health is more important than an individual's unlimited accumulation of wealth.
It builds a ceiling on wealth and a floor under poverty.
Beautifully said.
And it wasn't just economics. It was justice, too. The cities of refuge absolutely blew my mind when I read about them.
It is what we might call spatial mercy. Let's explain the context. In the ancient Near East, if someone was killed, even accidentally, say, an axe head flies off a handle and strikes a neighbor, it was the duty of the victim's closest relative, the avenger of blood, to kill the manslayer.
The blood feud.
Exactly. This primitive justice system could easily trigger an endless, multi-generational spiral of blood feuds and retaliation, wiping out entire families.
The Hatfields and McCoys, basically.
Exactly. So how does God's law address this? Not just by issuing a general moral command to be forgiving.
Right, because when people are angry, they aren't listening to general commands.
Right. God commands Israel to designate 6 specific cities of refuge, evenly distributed throughout the map. If you accidentally killed someone, you could literally run to the nearest city of refuge.
It's a physical safe zone.
Yes. Once inside its gates, you were legally protected from the avenger of blood until a proper, impartial trial could be held by the elders.
It literally built mercy into the map. It is just so breathtakingly physical. It recognizes that in a moment of intense grief and rage, people need a physical boundary, a literal wall, to interrupt the cycle of violence.
Yes, it creates a space for the law to operate without vengeance taking over.
And this brings us to one of the most intense, perhaps difficult concepts for modern listeners to grasp in the entire source material.
It's challenging.
Because God cares so deeply about how the land is treated, the biblical text presents the idea that the soil itself is a moral witness.
Yes.
This was wild to me. The text says that the land can be defiled by bloodshed, by idolatry, by severe injustice, and that if it gets bad enough, the land will literally vomit out its inhabitants.
Now, I know what you're probably thinking. To a 21st century scientifically minded listener, this sounds like primitive animism.
It totally does. It sounds like a Disney movie where the mountain gets angry and causes an avalanche because someone told a lie.
Right.
So ELI 5, This, for us, explain it like I'm 5. Is the Bible saying that dirt has a consciousness?
No, no. It is not animism where the rocks have spirits. It is actually a deep, profound theological realism.
Theological realism.
The created world is not morally blank. God designed the physical universe to be in harmony with moral truth. Human beings are embodied creatures. If a society lives in systemic greed, violence, and exploitation, the physical place they inhabit will inevitably suffer the consequences.
It shows up on the map.
It absolutely shows up on the map. Unjust zoning laws scar the community. Over-farming for quick profit pollutes the environment and destroys the topsoil. Ignoring safety regulations for cheap labor leads to industrial disasters that poison the water.
So it's cause and effect.
Exactly. The land vomiting out its inhabitants is a poetic but terrifyingly accurate way of describing societal collapse. When a culture completely abandons God's ethics, its physical infrastructure, its agriculture, and its social cohesion eventually break down, leading to exile or destruction.
Wow.
Conversely, if a society lives in justice, mercy, and worship, the place flourishes.
There is this incredible illustration in the notes that grounded this perfectly. It asked the reader to imagine 2 farming families living right next to each other.
I love this example.
Yeah, they share a property line. They're beside the exact same field under the exact same weather.
It is a perfect localized example of covenant geography in practice. Let's look at the first family.
Okay.
They look at their field and they see it purely as a commodity, a trophy of their own ego. It's an asset to extract maximum financial value from. They want to prove their superiority over their neighbors.
So they squeeze every drop out of it.
Right. They work the soil to the point of exhaustion. They fence it off tightly. They harvest every single grain of wheat right up to the literal inches of the property line, and they hoard it all in their barn.
Right. And then you look across the fence at the second family. They are looking at the exact same dirt.
But they see a gift.
Yes. They cultivate it and work hard, absolutely. But they follow the covenant rules. They let portions of it rest during the Sabbath year to replenish the nutrients. When they harvest, they follow the law of gleanings.
Meaning they deliberately leave the edges unpicked.
Exactly. They leave the edges of the field unpicked, and whatever drops on the ground stays on the ground, so that the poor, the widow, and the traveler passing through town have something to eat with dignity. And when it rains, they don't congratulate themselves on their brilliant farming skills. They thank God because they know they don't control the weather.
Both families occupy the exact same geographic coordinates, but only one family lives in covenant geography.
The physical space is identical, but the moral space is entirely different.
Yes. The difference isn't the location. The difference is the posture of the human heart toward the ultimate landlord. The space is morally arranged by how they treat the vulnerable and how they view God's ownership.
Which is such a convicting thought for us today. Think about your own front yard, or your bank account, or the spare room in your house. What does our use of space say about our hearts?
Are we hoarding or cultivating?
Exactly. Are we extracting, hoarding, and fencing off? Or are we cultivating, resting, and leaving the edges open for the vulnerable?
Unfortunately, as we transition to the next era of biblical history, we see that humanity, specifically the nation of Israel, does not stick to the ideal of the second family.
They rarely do.
No. Over the centuries of the kings, human power aggressively corrupt the geography. The rich exploit the poor, the kings build alliances with pagan nations and adopt their idols, and the covenant is shattered. And that profound failure ushers in the era of the prophets.
Which brings us to the architecture of
Yeah.
sin. When we read the prophets, Isaiah, Amos, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, I think we often have a very narrow view of what they were doing.
What's the common view?
Well, we picture them as these eccentric, isolated spiritual fortune tellers just predicting the future. Or maybe street preachers obsessed with private individual morality, just yelling at people to be good.
But the source material makes it abundantly clear. The prophetic imagination was fiercely, relentlessly concerned with public life.
Public spaces.
The prophets were not just talking about what happened in the inner chambers of the temple. They were screaming about what was happening in the streets, the courts, the markets, and specifically the city gates.
Let's talk about the city gate, because you read the Old Testament and the phrase "at the city gate" comes up constantly.
Yeah.
Why the gate? Why weren't they protesting at the king's palace?
In ancient Near Eastern city layouts, the gate was the choke point. It wasn't just a heavy door to keep invaders out. The gate complex was the center of civic life.
Like a town square.
Exactly. It was the marketplace where merchants set up their stalls. It was where the elders of the city sat on stone benches to hear legal disputes and dispense justice. It was the courthouse, the town hall, and the stock exchange all rolled into one.
So the gate was essentially the city's conscience.
Exactly. The prophets understood that if the gate was corrupt, if judges were taking bribes, if merchants were using rigged scales to cheat the poor, then the city was spiritually dead.
No matter how many religious songs they sang at the temple up the hill.
Right. They recognized that public life is a deeply theological category.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. This is where ancient history suddenly sounds like it was ripped right from today's headlines.
Oh, absolutely.
We see the prophets attacking the geography of greed. The prophet Isaiah has this fierce, blistering critique in chapter 5, where he condemns those who join house to house and add field to field until there is no more room. When I read that, I immediately thought about modern predatory economic systems.
It is ancient gentrification. It is monopoly.
It really is. It's the consolidation of wealth, where the powerful elite, the land barons, use their leverage to buy up all the smaller family farms. Farms that were supposed to be protected by the Jubilee, remember?
Yes.
And they displace the vulnerable, pushing the poor to the absolute margins of society, just so the rich can live in isolation in the center.
Isaiah is exposing the exact same spiritual logic that drives unhinged corporate greed today. Land in the Old Testament, as we established, was meant to be a covenant gift for families to share and pass down.
For survival and dignity.
Exactly. It was not intended to be a raw commodity for a few powerful men to hoard to build massive estates. When Isaiah attacks this, he is making a profound point. Sin isn't just a private bad thought in someone's head. Sin builds systems.
It becomes architectural.
Yes, it becomes embedded in housing policies and labor laws, in the layout of neighborhoods, and in economic structures.
And the absolute worst part, the thing that makes the prophets the most furious, is when these corrupt elites try to cover up their systemic greed with a thick layer of religion.
The prophet Amos is devastating on this specific point.
Oh, Amos does not hold back.
He really doesn't. He targets the northern kingdom of Israel during a time of great economic prosperity and great religious fervor. But Amos reveals that this nation has learned to combine vibrant, passionate religious worship with brutal, systematic economic exploitation.
The smell of your sacrifice cannot cover the rot of your exploitation.
God literally says through Amos, I despise your feasts, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. But let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream.
Wow.
The people are trampling the poor, squeezing them for every penny in the market, crushing the needy at the gate, and then dressing up in their finest clothes and gathering for massive religious festivals.
Singing loud songs.
Right, singing loud songs and fully expecting God to be impressed with their piety. The prophets declare that God is repulsed by this. Religious vitality without covenant justice is an abomination to him.
Because the sanctuary just becomes a shelter for hypocrisy. It's like, I don't know, a mob boss going to mass on Sunday morning after ordering a hit on Saturday night.
That's a very stark image, but it's accurate.
You can have a city that is famous for its holiness, famous for its historic temples, and yet simultaneously famous to God for its absolute hardness of heart.
Which is the tragic reality of Jerusalem during much of its history.
Okay, but let me push back for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
When you read all these incredibly intense critiques of the markets, the courts, the kings, the wealthy elites in the cities, isn't the most logical conclusion just to say cities are inherently bad?
Just abandon them.
Right. Wouldn't it be easier and frankly more biblical to just conclude that the urban environment is inherently sinful and the countryside is inherently good? Why not just abandon the corrupted city gate, retreat to a quiet cabin in the woods, grow your own tomatoes, and be holy in private?
It's a very tempting simplification, and it's one that many separatist movements throughout history have actually embraced. But the biblical text explicitly rejects that binary.
It does.
Yes, the Bible does not romanticize the rural and demonize the urban. What it actually says, and the source material highlights this beautifully, is that cities are intensifiers.
Intensifiers. I like that word. How does it work?
Think about what a city fundamentally is. It is a massive concentration of human power, culture, trade, density, and creativity. Because it concentrates human capacity, it exponentially magnifies whatever that group of people loves.
Oh, wow. Like a magnifying glass in the sun.
Exactly. If a city loves profit above human dignity, its density will produce forms of cruelty and exploitation at a scale impossible in a small village. But if a city loves justice, art, and the care of the vulnerable, its density can make it an incredible, unmatched place of refuge, innovation, and renewal.
So the city isn't evil, it's just an amplifier.
Exactly. Just look at the varied destinies of cities in Scripture. Jerusalem is deeply beloved, literally chosen by God as the place for his name to dwell, yet it is fiercely judged and destroyed for its corruption. Nineveh is the capital of Assyria, a brutal, bloodthirsty imperial threat, yet it astonishes everyone by experiencing massive repentance at the preaching of Jonah. Babylon becomes the enduring archetype of human pride and imperial seduction, the ultimate anti-Eden.
The city is a contested moral space.
Yes, a battleground for the human soul.
But eventually, in the history of Israel, the corruption in Jerusalem reaches a tipping point. The moral space completely collapses. God withdraws his protective presence. The Babylonians breach the walls, the temple is burned to the ground, and we get the ultimate geographical trauma: exile.
Exile is one of the most searing, agonizing themes in the entire Bible, because it isn't just a geopolitical defeat. Losing a war is terrible, but this was a profound theological crisis.
Think about Psalm 137. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept, when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our lyres, for there our captors required of us songs. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? It is sheer heartbreak.
To be exiled is to be violently unmoored from the specific place where your identity, your rhythms of worship, and your ancestral memory were formed. For an Israelite, the loss of the land and the complete destruction of the temple force a terrifying existential question.
Is our God actually weaker than the gods of Babylon?
Yes. And more personally, what remains of our faith when the sacred geography is entirely gone? Did we just trust the building, the walls, and the dirt? Or do we trust the God who gave them to us?
Wow.
Exile strips away all the physical props of their religion to see if any actual faith remains underneath.
It's the ultimate wilderness detox, part 2.
Yes, but on a much darker, grander scale.
But the beautiful, redeeming thing is that God doesn't leave them in exile forever. And what stood out to me is that when he restores them, his restoration is just as intensely spatial and physical as the judgment was.
It absolutely is.
When 70 years pass, and people like Ezra and Nehemiah lead the remnant back to Jerusalem, God doesn't just give them a warm, fuzzy spiritual feeling. He doesn't just say, okay, you've suffered enough, your sins are forgiven. Just feel peace in your hearts while the city stays in ruins.
Right. He doesn't leave it in ashes.
No. He commissions them to rebuild the physical walls of the city. He has them clear the rubble and rebuild the physical temple. He restores the physical gates, the tables, and the streets. It's a completely physical restoration.
Because, as the author notes, God's mercy is architectural. He doesn't just pardon individual guilt in the abstract. He reconstitutes a people's public life.
I love that. Architectural mercy.
He reorders their shared physical spaces so they can learn to inhabit them with justice and covenant faithfulness this time around.
So he gives them the geography back. But, and here's the catch, a rebuilt wall doesn't fix a corrupt human heart. They have the city back, but the humans inside the walls are still fundamentally flawed. So what's the next move?
That tension is exactly why the restoration of geography isn't the final answer. The geography has to become personal. God doesn't just send another blueprint for a better city. He sends himself.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the ultimate intersection of God and geography. The moment all of this history has been building toward, the Word becomes flesh.
The incarnation. If the Old Testament shows God working through land, laws, and cities, the life of Jesus of Nazareth intensifies that truth beyond measure. We often gloss over this, but the incarnation is the ultimate validation of place.
God puts feet on the ground.
God does not shout a message of salvation from a safe, detached distance in the clouds. He enters the human story at specific, verifiable coordinates on a map.
The geography of Jesus. The scandal of particularity. He doesn't spawn into the world in a random mythic cloud floating above the dirt. He has a hometown. He has an accent. He walks actual dusty dirt roads. He sweats. He sleeps.
And the specific locations of his life are deeply significant. They are not accidental. He is raised in Nazareth.
Can anything good come out of Nazareth?
Exactly. It was a place of utter obscurity and marginality. He spends the bulk of his ministry in Galilee, a region far removed from the religious power centers of Jerusalem, a region filled with common laborers, fishermen, and economic struggle.
Margins.
Right. And he deliberately chooses to walk through Samaria, purposefully crossing intensely hostile ethnic and historical borders that most rabbis would walk miles out of their way to avoid.
Wow.
And finally, he sets his face to journey toward Jerusalem, the center of religious and political power, the place of his eventual rejection and crucifixion.
And it's not just the macro regions. It's the highly specific, hyperlocal encounters he has with individuals. If you really pay attention to the Gospels, you see that Jesus meets people exactly where they are, contextually. He adapts his approach to the physical and social setting.
This is one of the most vital, practical lessons in the text for any kind of leadership, ministry, or human relationship. Jesus doesn't treat people as interchangeable widgets. He doesn't have one canned sermon that he just yells at everyone he meets. He applies the truth of the kingdom with immense incarnational intelligence, based entirely on their specific setting and their internal state.
Let's slow down and look at two of these encounters side by side, because the contrast is brilliant. Let's look at Nicodemus and then the woman at the well.
A perfect pairing. Let's start with Nicodemus in John chapter 3.
So Nicodemus is a Pharisee. He's the religious elite, a member of the ruling council. He has wealth, status, and a massive reputation to protect. He seeks Jesus out, but he does it at night, under the cover of darkness.
Why at night?
Because he's cautious. He's intrigued by Jesus, but he's terrified of being seen by his peers associating with his rogue, controversial rabbi.
Yeah.
So what does Jesus do? Jesus doesn't drag Nicodemus out into the town square, point a finger at him, and publicly shame him for being a hypocritical coward.
No, he doesn't.
He meets him in the dark. He accepts the setting Nicodemus needs. He engages him in a dense, theological, highly intellectual, and incredibly patient conversation about being born again. He meets the scholar on scholarly terms in a safe, private space.
Now contrast that profound privacy with the very next chapter, John 4, the woman at the well in Samaria.
It is the exact opposite setting.
Completely. Jesus is in Samaria, hostile territory for a Jew. It is the middle of the day, high noon, under a blazing sun. He is resting by a public well. A Samaritan woman comes to draw water.
And we have to ask, why is she there at noon? Women usually drew water in the cool of the morning or evening, together as a social event.
She is there at noon to avoid the other women. Because of her history of multiple marriages and her current living situation, she is a social outcast. She is carrying deep shame.
So she's hiding in plain sight.
Yes. So Jesus is sitting in a highly public space, but dealing with a profoundly isolated person by simply speaking to her, "Give me a drink." He shatters 3 massive cultural taboos simultaneously.
What are they?
He is a man speaking alone to a woman. He is a Jew speaking to a Samaritan. And he is a rabbi speaking to a known sinner.
It's radical boundary crossing. And he doesn't debate high theology with her, like he did with Nicodemus. He addresses the deep, hidden wound of her life, her thirst for love and stability, right through the physical, practical object they are standing next to, the water of the well.
Yes.
He uses her physical geography to explain living water.
He dismantles her shame by seeing her fully and offering grace in the very place she went to hide.
It's brilliant, and you see this spatial awareness everywhere.
Yeah.
Look at Zacchaeus. The guy is literally hiding up in a sycamore tree because he's short, but also because he's a corrupt, wealthy tax collector, universally hated by the town.
Right.
Jesus is walking through a massive crowd. He could have stopped under the tree and preached a booming sermon at Zacchaeus about the evils of extortion, but instead, Jesus looks up, notices the hidden and disgraced man, calls him by his actual name, and says, "I must stay at your house today."
The invitation into the home.
Yes. Jesus invites himself into Zacchaeus' private space. He crosses the threshold. He eats with him. And that physical proximity, that scandalous willingness to share space with a traitor, is what melts Zacchaeus' heart and brings about actual financial restitution to the people he robbed.
Or consider another profound use of space. The mourners at Bethany. Martha and Mary are completely devastated by the death of their brother, Lazarus. Jesus arrives days late. The sisters are weeping. The community is weeping.
Right.
Jesus is God. He knows for a fact that in about 5 minutes, he is going to perform a miracle and raise Lazarus from the dead. He could have walked right past them with a big smile and said, "Hey, stop crying. I've got this. Watch this trick."
He could have immediately launched into a theological lecture on the resurrection.
But he doesn't. He enters the physical and emotional space of their grief. He stops. He listens to Mary's pain. He looks at the tomb. And John 11:35 gives us the shortest, perhaps most profound verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. He voluntarily enters the emotional geography of human devastation, validating their sorrow before he acts to remove it. He shows us that compassionate presence must precede the fixing of the problem.
It's just so incredibly relational. The physical setting, the emotional state of the person, these dictate Jesus' approach entirely. But of all the specific locations in Jesus' life, of all the places he stands, nothing carries the sheer emotional and theological weight of his final arrival in Jerusalem. The moment he crests the Mount of Olives, looks down at the city and weeps.
It is a staggering, heartbreaking moment in the narrative of Luke. The Son of God, the Messiah, stands looking out over the city of David. He is looking at the gleaming white walls of the temple, the center of covenant history, the very place God chose to dwell, and he breaks down.
He just breaks.
The Greek suggests this isn't just a quiet tear, it is a visceral, loud sobbing.
Why? I mean, why the intense tears?
Because of the tragedy of what the text calls a missed visitation, Jesus cries out, "Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes." He laments that the city did not recognize the time of its visitation by God.
Think about it. Jerusalem had everything.
Everything.
It had the legacy of the prophets, it had the sacred scriptures, it had the elaborate festivals, the massive priesthood, the glorious temple architecture. It had all the outward symbols of faith. But it lacked the actual substance. It was so obsessed with its own political survival and religious superiority that it did not recognize the Prince of Peace when he was literally walking down its streets.
So what does this all mean for our understanding of God? Jesus is God incarnate. He knows that in a few decades, because of their rebellion, the Romans are going to come and absolutely level that city, destroying the temple.
Right.
He's the judge of the earth. But he's crying over the very city he is judging. It's this massive, mind-bending paradox.
The paradox is that God's perfect holiness and his profound grief are not opposites. In the biblical imagination, divine judgment is never, ever divorced from divine compassion.
That's right.
Jesus weeps because the judgment coming upon Jerusalem is a terrifying reality, a consequence of their own violent choices. But he does not delight in it. He is not up there rubbing his hands together in vindictive glee. He honors human freedom enough to allow them to reject him, but he loves them enough to lament the horrific consequences of that misuse of freedom.
It shows a God who is deeply moved, morally clear, and covenantally faithful all at once.
It really shatters our simplistic categories.
It does. He doesn't offer truth without love, which is just brutality and legalism.
Yeah.
Nor does he offer love without truth, which is just empty sentimentality. He offers both, perfectly held together in tears.
That is heavy, and it's incredibly beautiful. He weeps over the city because he loves it, even as the city actively plots to reject him. And of course, days later, Jesus is dragged out, crucified physically outside the city gates, another spatial detail the author highlights, suffering outside the camp.
Yes.
He is buried in a physical garden tomb, and on the third day, he physically, bodily rises again. And then he ascends to the Father. But the theology of place doesn't ascend with him and disappear from the earth. The mission of redeeming the physical world gets handed off to his followers.
The early church?
Right. Which begs a huge question. How does this intensely local Jewish message travel across the entire Roman Empire without losing its soul?
That tension brings us to our final major section of the deep dive, house to house, city to city. We are looking at the story of the early church in the book of Acts. How does the kingdom of God expand geographically?
And it kicks off with an explosion, Pentecost, which the source text compares directly point by point to the Tower of Babel.
Yes, the author argues that Pentecost is the deliberate theological reversal of Babel.
The reversal.
Let's recall Babel from Genesis 11. Human pride and a desire to build an empire without God led to the sudden confusion of languages and the fracturing and scattering of people across the earth as an act of judgment.
Okay, that was Babel.
Now look at Pentecost in Acts 2. Jews from all over the known world, speaking dozens of different languages, are gathered in Jerusalem. The Holy Spirit falls on the disciples, and they begin to preach the gospel. And the miracle is that every single person hears the message in their own native dialect.
Right.
But notice very carefully what the Holy Spirit doesn't do.
This is key. The Spirit doesn't reverse Babel by making them all magically speak one single uniform language.
Yeah,
He doesn't force them all to speak Hebrew or a new heavenly language to be part of the club.
exactly. Pentecost does not erase diverse languages, diverse cultures, and diverse places. It redemptively uses them. The Holy Spirit validates the many languages of the earth by choosing to speak through them.
It's a profound point.
It shows that the gospel of Jesus is universal in its ultimate scope. It is for everyone, but it is deeply, inherently contextual in its practice. It translates. It doesn't demand that you abandon your culture to hear God. God speaks into your culture.
And as this translated gospel begins to spread, it moves immediately into the most intimate, mundane spaces of daily life. We talked about house to house. The early church wasn't built on massive, impressive public architecture
They didn't have mega cathedrals.
or giant amphitheaters. The entire movement was built in living rooms, courtyards, and dining rooms.
The profound power of the table. To understand this, we have to understand the sociology of the Roman triclinium, the dining room.
Okay, set the scene for us.
In the ancient Greco-Roman world, the dining table was the ultimate symbol of social stratification. Who you ate with, where you reclined at the table, and even what quality of food you were served compared to the person next to you rigidly defined your worth and social status.
It was a strict, unforgiving hierarchy.
Extremely strict. Elites ate with elites, slaves ate the scraps, men rarely ate with women in public settings, Jews absolutely did not eat with Gentiles due to strict purity laws.
And the early Christians look at that entire system and totally dismantle it.
They radically defied it. Around the Christian tables, you had the wealthy merchant sitting next to the day laborer. You had the Roman centurion breaking bread with the Jewish zealot. You had slaves and free citizens, men and women, sharing the exact same cup and the exact same loaf in honor of Christ.
The table literally became their theology.
Beautifully said. It was not just an abstract idea preached on a Sunday. It was the physical space where the reconciliation of the gospel became a visible, undeniable, even shocking reality to the surrounding culture. Their use of domestic space was a threat to the imperial social order.
But they couldn't just stay in their cozy, diverse dining rooms in Jerusalem forever. Jesus told them to go to the ends of the earth. And the way God actually moves them out of their comfort zone is fascinating and honestly a little terrifying.
It's persecution.
Yeah. Stephen is martyred in the street. A wave of intense violence hits the church in Jerusalem, led by a Pharisee named Saul, and the believers run for their lives. They flee the city.
To the naked eye, it looked like the utter destruction of the nascent church. But what looked like destruction was actually divine redistribution.
Pressure became propulsion. I love that phrase from the text.
It's very apt.
They scatter in fear, absolutely, but wherever they run, to Antioch, to Cyprus, to Cyrene, they take the gospel with them. They don't hide. They start speaking. They become seeds blown by the wind of persecution, taking root in new soil.
And as the gospel reaches these new, complex, diverse cities across the empire, we see the rise of that very Pharisee who used to hunt them, Saul, who becomes the Apostle Paul.
Right.
Paul is the ultimate biblical case study in the wisdom of geographical context. His urban mission strategy is an absolute masterclass in cultural adaptability.
Walk us through that, because the way he shifts his approach depending on the city limits is incredible.
Let's look at three distinct environments. First, when Paul is in Jerusalem or dealing primarily with a Jewish audience in a synagogue, how does he preach? He reasons from the Torah.
He quotes the Psalms and the prophets.
Extensively. He speaks the internal language of covenant history, arguing that Jesus is the fulfillment of the Jewish messianic expectation.
Because they already share that foundation. But then he goes to Athens.
Yes, Athens, the intellectual and philosophical capital of the ancient world. In Acts 17, Paul is standing in the Areopagus.
Okay, let's pause. For those of us who aren't ancient history buffs, what actually is the Areopagus? Is that like a courthouse or university or a philosophy club?
It was a little bit of all three. The Areopagus, or Mars Hill, was a prominent rock outcropping near the Acropolis, but it also referred to the elite council of philosophers and civic leaders who met there. They were the cultural gatekeepers of Athens, judging new ideas, religious claims, and philosophical schools.
So Paul is standing in front of the ultimate TED Talk audience of Greek philosophers.
Exactly. And notice what he does not do. He doesn't start quoting Moses. He doesn't bring up the Exodus or the temple in Jerusalem, because that means absolutely nothing to a Stoic or an Epicurean philosopher in Greece.
It would just go right over their heads.
Exactly. Instead, he looks around at their physical city. He points to their own statues. He says, "I see that you are very religious. I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.'"
Wow. He uses their own stuff.
He uses their own civic architecture as his starting point. And then he quotes their own pagan Greek poets Epimenides and Aratus to explain the sovereignty of God before finally calling them to repent and believe in the resurrected Jesus.
And then compare that to Ephesus.
Ephesus was completely different from Athens. It wasn't primarily a city of lofty philosophy. It was a gritty, booming hub of commerce, occult magic, and the massive temple of Artemis.
The power city.
So Paul's approach shifts again. He rents out the lecture hall of Tyrannus, teaching daily for 2 years. He engages directly with the spiritual and economic powers of the city, performing miracles that challenge the local magicians.
Right, which causes a riot.
Yes, a massive riot among the silversmiths who are losing money because people are abandoning their idol-making business.
Okay, let me throw a flag on the play here. I can hear the critique from a skeptical listener right now.
Bring it on.
If you constantly change your approach, your vocabulary, and your methods for every single city you walk into, aren't you just a chameleon? Aren't you just a salesman compromising the truth to be popular and culturally relevant? Where is the line between contextualization and selling out?
That is the perennial question of the church. But what's fascinating here, and what the source text argues forcefully, is that assuming one single rigid method fits everywhere is the actual error.
The actual error.
Yes. It is a failure to love the people you are speaking to. Paul isn't changing the core message. The core message, Christ crucified for sins, bodily resurrected, and reigning as Lord, is always the absolute non-negotiable center, whether he is in a synagogue or on Mars Hill.
Though adaptation is not compromise.
Exactly. It is translation.
This reminds me of an analogy we were discussing earlier. It makes me think of a master chef. Let's say the chef has a core vital ingredient, a piece of incredibly high-quality, nutrient-dense fish. The nutritional value, the protein, the core substance of that fish is exactly the same no matter where on earth it is. It doesn't change.
Right, the substance is fixed.
But if that master chef is serving it to a diner in a coastal town in Mexico, they might prepare it with fresh lime, cilantro, and chili.
Yeah.
If they take that exact same fish and serve it to a diner in Tokyo, it's going to be served raw as pristine sashimi with soy and wasabi. If they serve it in a fine dining restaurant in Paris, it's going to be pan-seared with a heavy butter and herb sauce.
And the point is, the core nutritional value of the gospel is completely identical in all three meals.
Exactly. But the plating, the flavor profile, the point of entry is lovingly adapted. So the specific diner in that specific culture can actually digest it, recognize its value, and appreciate it.
That is a perfect analogy. Contextual wisdom changes the packaging, the spices, and the presentation, but it never alters the lordship of Christ. To demand that the French diner eat the Mexican dish in order to prove they really love the fish is ridiculous.
It confuses the recipe with the substance.
Yes. The early church succeeded against all human odds, precisely because it was spirit-led to look at the geography and discern exactly what the gospel required in each new, specific human reality. They loved the truth, but they also loved the place they were in.
Which brings us to the end of this incredibly rich, expansive journey. We've covered literally thousands of years of biblical history today.
It's been a lot of ground.
Literally. From the soil of the Garden of Eden to the dusty altars of Abraham, through the brutal wilderness detox, into the intricate rules of covenant geography. We've stood at the corrupt city gates of the prophets. We've walked the roads of Galilee and wept over Jerusalem with Jesus. And we've sat at the radically inclusive dining tables of the early church.
And the overarching synthesis, the golden thread running through all of these sources, is clear. Geography is not spiritually neutral. Place matters immensely.
Yeah.
God is not embarrassed by the physical world. He is not ashamed to be local. He does not save souls in the abstract, pulling them out of reality. He forms a people in actual, tangible places.
So, turning directly to you, the person listening to this deep dive right now, what does this mean for you tomorrow morning? It means your own life, your own location, is not accidental. The neighborhood you live in, with all its quirks and problems, the office you commute to with all its stress, the specific table you eat your meals at, these are not just dead backdrops.
No, they aren't.
These are active, pulsing arenas where the kingdom of God is quietly, persistently breaking in. You are called to faithful presence right where you stand. You don't need to be somewhere else, in some more spiritual city, to do something holy.
Indeed. It charges the ordinary with extraordinary significance. And to leave you with one final, awe-inspiring concept from the very end of the biblical narrative. The Bible does not end with humanity escaping a burning earth to float around in the clouds as disembodied spirits.
It definitely doesn't end in the clouds. That's the ultimate portable software update myth.
No, it ends in the book of Revelation with a stunning vision. The New Jerusalem, the holy city, coming down out of heaven to a fully renewed physical creation.
Coming down to us.
Yes, the biblical story ends where it began, but magnified. The Garden of Eden from Genesis becomes a magnificent, bustling city, and that city is filled with a life-giving river and the trees of a garden. God's ultimate, final plan is to permanently make his home in a redeemed physical place, living face to face with his people.
So imagine standing in the middle of your familiar, crowded city again. Look at the concrete, the people, the traffic. If God's ultimate eternal plan is not to abandon the physical world, but to physically renew the earth and dwell in a redeemed city, how does that change the way you treat, love, and invest in your own city tomorrow morning?